Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unbound, Season 3, The Other Side of Quiet. The cruelest thing about trauma isn't what it does to you in the moment, it's what it teaches you to do to yourself for years afterward. I do have a little content warning here, discussion of survivor's guilt, self-harm behavior, substance use, depression, grief, and intimate partner trauma. This is Chapter 10 in the book, The Self-Torture Years. The cruelest thing about trauma isn't what it does to you in the moment, it's what it teaches you to do to yourself for years afterward. In the months following Kira's death, I became my own worst enemy. Brandon was gone. He'd disappeared from my life after that final attack in February, but I didn't need him anymore to destroy myself. I'd learned his lessons so well that I could torture myself more effectively than he ever had. The voice in my head that told me I was worthless, that everything was my fault, that I was toxic to everyone around me. That voice sounded exactly like his, but it was coming from inside now, which made it impossible to escape. I couldn't run from my own thoughts. I couldn't hide from my own memories. I couldn't get away from the person who was hurting me most, because that person was me. And the first casualty of my self-destruction was the one person who deserved it least. Nate. We had many episodes after that one where I told him to just leave. Episodes I initiated. Frustrated his stubborn ass was not fully leaving. I loved him so much, but he became one of many men I allowed in very different ways. The thing is, all of those men I let use me, all while I thought I was using them. Nate was the only one who genuinely loved me and wanted me, while the rest treated me like the trash I felt I was. I pushed Nate away with the kind of precision that only comes from intimate knowledge of someone's vulnerabilities. I was as crafty and manipulative as my own abuser. Not because I didn't love him. I loved him more than I'd ever loved anyone, more than I thought it was possible to love another human being. I pushed him away because I loved him. Because, as I have repeatedly said, in my trauma-twisted logic, loving me was dangerous for him. Being with me had already cost him his son. How much more damage would I do if I let him stay? The guilt was eating me alive from the inside. Every time I looked at Nate, I saw Kier. Every time he touched me gently, I remembered the violence that had taken our baby. Every time he tried to comfort me, I felt like I was deceiving him just by accepting his love. I didn't deserve his kindness. I didn't deserve his patience. I didn't deserve his forgiveness for failing to protect our child. So I made sure he knew it. I constantly picked fights over nothing. I canceled plans at the last minute. I stopped returning his calls, stopped answering the door when he came by, stopped showing up to places where I knew he'd be. In March, he'd planned a quiet dinner at his apartment. Nothing fancy, just pasta and conversation. I showed up 2 hours late, shit-faced, with some guy I'd met at a bar. I watched Nate's face crumble and told myself I was doing him a favor. Later, he brought me flowers on what would have been Kira's due date. I threw them in the trash while he was still standing there. Another time he said, "I love you," and I laughed, actually laughed, like it was the funniest joke I'd ever heard. When he asked what was wrong, I told him I needed space. When he asked how he could help, I told him he couldn't. When he said he loved me, I found ways to make him question whether that was true. I was trying to love him by permanently destroying us. I was trying to protect him by breaking his heart. I was trying to save him by pushing him away before I could hurt him any worse than I already had. The logic made perfect sense to my traumatized brain. The logic was also completely fucking insane. But trauma doesn't operate on logic. It operates on fear and shame and the desperate need to prevent more pain, even when the prevention causes more pain than the original wound. Nate didn't give up easily. That boy was loyal and committed. For months, he kept trying. He'd show up with coffee and patience, willing to sit with me in my grief without trying to fix it. He'd send cards with no expectations of response. He'd leave messages telling me he loved me and he wasn't going anywhere. His persistence broke my heart and terrified me in equal measure, because part of me wanted so desperately to let him love me. Part of me wanted to collapse into his arms and let him carry some of the weight I was drowning under. But every time I felt myself softening toward him, Brandon's voice would kick in with reminders of what happened to people who got too close to me. Look what you did to your baby. Look what you did to him. Everything you touch gets destroyed. He'd be better off without you. Everyone would be better off without you. The voice was relentless, and it knew exactly which buttons to push to keep me isolated and miserable. So when Nate would reach for me, I'd pull away. When he'd try to talk about our future, I'd change the subject. When he'd mention Kier, our beautiful, perfect son who died because of my choices, I'd shut down completely. I couldn't bear to see the pain in Nate's eyes when he talked about the baby we'd lost. I just couldn't stand the gentleness in his voice when he'd say it wasn't my fault, that there was nothing I could have done differently. Because I knew there was. I could have told my parents about Brandon years earlier. I could have gone to the police. I could have been braver, stronger, smarter. I could have protected our son if I hadn't been such a coward. Every platitude Nate offered, "It's not your fault. You did the best you could. You couldn't have known," felt like lies designed to make me feel better about being a failure as a mother and a partner. So I stopped letting him try to comfort me. I stopped sharing my grief with the one person who was grieving the same loss. I made myself an island of misery, population 1. And from that island, I watched the most loving, patient, wonderful man I'd ever known slowly realize that I wasn't ever going to let him save me. The final breaking point came in June 1994, but not before 2 moments that made everything so much worse. The first was when Nate actually begged to take me on a date. Just one date. Just a chance to remind me that we could still be something other than two people drowning in shared grief. I said yes, because I didn't know how to keep saying no to someone who looked at me with that much hope in his eyes. We went to see Speed, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock on a bus that couldn't slow down or it would explode. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. That's exactly what my life felt like. One wrong move and everything detonates. But Nate was so sweet that night, so genuinely excited to just be with me doing something normal, something that didn't revolve around grief and loss and all the ways we'd failed each other. He bought popcorn and made stupid jokes and laughed at all the ridiculous action sequences. And I tried. God, I really tried. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I let him hold my hand in the dark theater. I pretended for 2 hours that maybe we could be okay again. I let him kiss me. He was so hopeful. I could feel it radiating off him, this desperate, beautiful hope. That this was the beginning of us finding our way back to each other. And I knew, even while I was sitting there trying to enjoy the movie, that I was going to destroy that hope. That I couldn't be what he needed me to be. That his optimism was going to make the inevitable ending so much worse. Then, not long after, he came by my parents' place on what should have been just another ordinary day in June. We ended up sitting on the couch watching the O.J. Simpson police chase unfold on live television. That surreal moment when a whole country stopped to watch a white Bronco drive slowly down a California freeway. It was bizarre, intense, and somehow impossibly we had fun. We made commentary on the absurdity of it all. We sat close together on the couch. We felt, for those strange hours, like two people who could be in the same room without grief crushing everything between us. Nate was hopeful again. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way he relaxed into the couch beside me, in the way he probably thought we were finally turning a corner. That's when he showed up a few days later with groceries. That's when I ruined everything. He was putting food away in my fridge. Chocolate milk, oranges, bread, deli meat, the kinds of simple things you feed someone who's forgotten how to feed themselves. When he said quietly, "I miss him too, you know." And something inside me snapped. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Just don't." Don't what? He asked, turning to look at me with those patient, loving eyes that made me want to scream. Don't pretend like this is the same for you. I said, the words coming out like poison I needed to expel from my system. Don't pretend like you lost what I lost. Nate's face went very still. What do you mean? I mean, you didn't carry him for all those months. You didn't feel him move inside your body. You didn't... I stopped, realizing I was about to say something I couldn't take back. I didn't what? Nate asked, and his voice was quieter now, more careful. You didn't get him killed, I whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. Nate stared at me, and I could see him trying to process what I just said, trying to figure out how to respond to such a fundamental distortion of reality. Beth, he said finally, you didn't get him killed. Brandon did that. Brandon chose to hurt you. Brandon chose to hurt our baby. None of that was your fault. But I was done listening to his kindness, done pretending that his love could somehow absolve me of my failures. Get out, I said. What? Get out, I repeated louder this time. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend like we're going to be okay, like we're going to get through this together, like there's some happy ending waiting for us after everything I've destroyed. You haven't destroyed anything, Nate said, taking a step toward me. We can get through this. We can get help. We can... No, I said, backing away from him like he was dangerous instead of the safest person I'd ever known. We can't. I can't. I'm poison, Nate. I'm toxic. Everyone I love gets hurt, and I can't watch that happen to you anymore. That's not true, he said, like there was desperation in his voice now, like he could see me slipping away and was trying to grab onto something, anything to keep me from falling. It is true, I said, and I made my voice as cold as I could, because I knew that kindness wouldn't push him away, but cruelty might. Look around. Look at what knowing me has cost you. You lost your son because of me. You spent months trying to fix someone who's broken beyond repair. Not a great person either. A fat blob of useless, ugly, mean girl. How much more of your life are you going to waste on me? I watched the words hit him like someone was physically beating the tar out of him. Like I was physically beating him. I watched him flinch, as if I'd slapped him. After the movie, after the OJ chase, after I let him in and led him on, he'd let himself hope again that maybe we could find our way back to each other. I'd let him hope, and then I destroyed it. I don't think loving you is a waste, he said quietly. Well, I do. I lied. And that was the lie that finally broke us. Nate looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact second when he realized I wasn't going to let him help me. I wasn't going to let him love me. I wasn't going to let him be part of whatever came next for me. It has stayed with me all these years later. Okay, he said finally, if that's what you want. It is, I said, even though saying it felt like tearing my own heart out. He nodded, picked up his keys from my kitchen counter, and walked toward the door. For what it's worth, he said with a very shaky voice, pausing in the doorway without turning around. I don't think you're poison. I think you're in pain, and I think you're pushing away the one person who might be able to help you heal from it. And then he left. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the groceries he'd bought me, and cried until I had nothing left. I'd just destroyed the best thing in my life to protect it from myself. The self-torture was complete. The months that followed were some of the darkest of my life. Without Nate's steadying presence, without his gentle reminders that I was worthy of love and care, I spiraled into a depression so deep I sometimes forgot what daylight looked like. I stopped showering regularly, stopped cleaning my room, stopped answering the phone or checking my mail or doing any of the basic tasks that kept a person tethered to the world of the living. I was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. The only thing that got me out of the house was work at the warehouse of the local newspaper and my volunteer job at the ER in the hospital I had care at. I survived on whatever I could find in the kitchen and sleep and self-loathing and meaningless encounters that left me feeling more empty than before. I replayed every moment with Brandon, every choice I'd made, every opportunity I'd had to do things differently. I tortured myself with elaborate fantasies of alternate timelines where I'd been braver, smarter, and stronger, timelines where Kier would still be alive, and Nate and I would be raising him together. My parents would be happy for us, and I'd be free of all my secrets. I spent hours staring at the photos from the hospital, the precious few pictures we had of our perfect, beautiful boy. I'd hold them and apologize to him for failing as his mother, for not protecting him, for not being strong enough to keep him safe. I kept the elephant onesie we dressed him in, kept it in the shoebox with the photos, but sometimes I'd take it out and hold it. It still smelled like the hospital, like loss, like the brief moment when I'd been someone's mother. I'd press it against my face and cry until I couldn't breathe, apologizing over and over to a baby who would never hear me. Nate didn't know I had it. His mother carried it from the hospital when we left, a gift I didn't deserve, a reminder I couldn't escape. I wrote him letters I never sent, telling him about his father, about how much we'd both loved him, about the life we'd planned for him before it was stolen away. I talked to him sometimes late at night when the grief felt too big to contain in my body. I'd tell him stories about Nate, about how kind and gentle and loving his dad was, and about how we both wanted him so much. And then I'd remember that he was dead because of me, and the guilt would crash over me again like a wave, pulling me under until I couldn't breathe. Nate would call, I wouldn't answer. He would leave a voicemail. I'm thinking about him today, about you, about who we were supposed to be. I love you. I miss you. I miss him. I deleted it without responding. He sent flowers. I threw them away. I would spend the day in bed looking at the photos, holding the onesie, talking to a baby who might have been 6 months old by then, would have been smiling, rolling over, reaching for things, would have had Nate's eyes and my stubborn streak, would have been loved beyond measure. I apologized to him for hours, for failing to protect him, for pushing away his father, for not being strong enough to keep our family together, for surviving what he hadn't. The worst part was that I knew Nate was right. I knew intellectually that Brandon was responsible for what happened, not me. I knew that I'd been a victim, not a perpetrator. But knowing something and feeling it are two completely different things. And what I felt every day, every hour, every minute was that I had failed at the most basic job a mother has, keeping her child safe. I had failed at the most basic job a partner has, being honest about the dangers in my life. I had failed at the most basic job a human has, protecting the people I loved from the consequences of my choices. The logical part of my brain could argue with these beliefs all day long. The traumatized part of my brain didn't give a shit about logic. It only cared about punishment, and I was very, very good at punishing myself. I lost myself that summer not from any conscious effort to disappear, but from the simple fact I didn't want to exist in a body that could be hurt again. So I ate, and I ate, and I ate. Not because I was hungry, but because I was building armor. Every pound I gained felt like protection, another layer between me and the world, another barrier between my body and anyone who might want to hurt it. I stopped looking in mirrors, stopped weighing myself, stopped caring what size clothes I needed because I bought everything 3 sizes too big anyway. I'd eat entire pizzas in my room at night, methodically, mechanically, not even tasting the food. I'd eat until I felt sick, until the physical discomfort drowned out the emotional pain for a few hours. My body became unrecognizable to me, which was exactly what I wanted. If I didn't recognize myself, maybe the memories couldn't find me. Maybe Brandon's voice in my head would get confused about whose body this was and leave me alone. It didn't work. The voice always found me. I ate to make myself more unattractive, unseeable, untouchable. I ate to disappear inside my own flesh. I ate to create a body that no one would want to assault, to rape, or to use against me. Food became my shield and my weapon and my hiding place all at once. And when the eating alone wasn't enough to numb the pain, I started acting out. I acted out at work. I acted out with friends, almost trying to sabotage those cherished friendships. And the worst, and as I already alluded to, with men in ways that felt like taking control back. Random hookups where I called the shots, where I decided what happened and when it stopped, where I had the power instead of them. I'd choose men who looked nothing like Nate, men who were rough where he'd been gentle, men who wanted nothing from me except what I was offering. During sex, I'd narrate in my head, I'm in control. I chose this. This is my decision, my body, my choice. But afterward, lying alone in beds that smelled like strangers, I'd feel more empty than before, more used, more convinced that this was all I was good for. I was trying to prove I could take sex from men instead of having it taken from me. Instead, I was just letting different men take different pieces of me, telling myself the difference mattered. It felt like reclaiming something Brandon had stolen from me. It felt like proving I could choose what happened to my body. Really, it was just another form of self-destruction disguised as empowerment. My parents were worried, me still living at home, them watching their daughter get bigger and angrier and more reckless by the day. They didn't know what to do with me. They'd ask gentle questions about therapy, about what was wrong, about how they could help. One night, my mom knocked on my door after I'd been crying for hours. She sat on the edge of my bed and said, "Beth, whatever it is, we can handle it. Please let us help you." The words were right there. I was pregnant. I lost a baby. His name was Kier. So simple. So impossible. "I'm just tired," I said instead. "I'm fine." She looked at me with such sadness, like she knew I was lying, but didn't know how to call me on it without pushing me further away. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm here whenever you're ready." I never was. One night, I heard my parents talking in their bedroom. I'd gotten up to get water and their door was cracked open. "Something happened to her," my mom was saying, and she was crying. "Something terrible happened and she won't tell us what." "I know," my dad said. His voice sounded broken, "but we can't help her if she won't let us in." "What if she does something?" My mom couldn't finish the sentence. "She won't," my dad said, but he didn't sound convinced. I stood in the hallway listening to my parents grieve the loss of the daughter I used to be, and I couldn't bring myself to tell them why she was gone. I went back to my room and ate until I felt sick, till their worry couldn't touch me through the layers of numbness I'd built. My sister tried too. She'd knock on my door, ask if I wanted to watch a movie or go for a long drive, just talk like we used to. I'd tell her I was tired, busy, fine, all the words that meant leave me alone without making me explain why. She knew about some of my lies. She'd seen me spin stories for years, but I think she could tell this was different, that whatever I was hiding now was bigger than fake boyfriends and tall tales. "I'm here," she'd say, "whenever you're ready." But I was never ready, because telling her meant admitting I'd been pregnant, that I'd lost a baby, that there was a whole chapter of my life she knew absolutely nothing about. It meant admitting I'd failed at protecting something precious. So I kept her out of it too, added her to the list of people I loved too much to let close. But I couldn't seem to care about their concern. I couldn't seem to care about anything except the crushing weight of guilt and the exhausting work of getting through each day without completely falling apart. I thought about Nate constantly. I wondered how he was doing, whether he was dating someone new, whether he thought about Kier as much as I did. I missed him with an intensity that felt like physical pain, but I couldn't bring myself to reach out to him. I saw him once that summer, completely by accident. I was at a 24-hour market on Brant Street at 2 a.m. I started buying all my junk food in the middle of the night to avoid seeing anyone I knew, and there he was, in the cereal aisle. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered. He was staring at a box of the cereal we both loved, and the expression on his face nearly broke me. I backed out of the aisle before he saw me, abandoned my basket, went home empty-handed. I told myself I was protecting him from having to see what I'd become. Really, I was protecting myself from seeing what I'd done to him. What would I say? Sorry I destroyed the best relationship of my life because I was too broken to accept love? Sorry I blamed you for grieving the same loss I was grieving? Sorry I pushed you away because I thought I was protecting you from my toxicity? All of those things were true, but they felt too small for the magnitude of what I'd done to us. I'd taken two people who loved each other deeply and who were trying to heal from an unimaginable loss, and I'd made that healing impossible by insisting that I was too damaged to deserve comfort. I'd taken a man who wanted nothing more than to love me and support me through the worst experience of my life, and I'd convinced him that his love was unwanted and his support was useless. I'd taken a relationship that could have been a source of strength and healing, and I'd turned it into another casualty of Brandon's violence. Because that's what trauma does. It doesn't just hurt you in the moment. It teaches you to hurt yourself and the people you love for years afterward. It convinces you that isolation is safety, that suffering is penance, that pushing away love is protection. It turns you into the architect of your own destruction. There was a moment when I caught my reflection unexpectedly, not in a mirror I'd been avoiding, but in a store window as I walked past. I stopped and stared at this person I didn't recognize, bigger, angrier, harder than the girl Nate had fallen in love with. And I heard Brandon's voice in my head say, "See, I told you, you're worthless, unlovable, better off alone, cow." Except it wasn't Brandon's voice anymore. It was mine. I'd become so good at torturing myself that I didn't need him to do it anymore. I'd internalized every cruel thing he'd ever said to me and turned it into my own internal monologue. He'd won. Even though he was gone, even though he disappeared from my life, he'd won. Because I was doing his work for him now, more efficiently than he ever had. And by the fall of 1994, I had become a master architect. The girl who'd survived Brandon's abuse had finally been defeated. Not by her abuser, but by the voice he'd left behind. And it would take something extraordinary to make her remember that she was worth saving. What's actually true? Self-punishment after trauma feels logical when you've been convinced that you're responsible for what happened to you. If you caused it, then punishing yourself might prevent it from happening again. If you deserved it, then suffering might balance the cosmic scales. If you're toxic to others, then isolating yourself might protect them. This is trauma logic, not real logic, but it feels real when you're drowning in shame and guilt. Pushing away healthy relationships while you're healing isn't about not wanting love. It's about believing you're too damaged to deserve love, too dangerous to accept love, too broken to sustain love. The self-destruction that comes after abuse isn't separate from the abuse. It's the abuse continuing through your own hands, using the abuser's voice that's now living in your head. What ways do you punish yourself for things that weren't your fault? What good things do you deny yourself because you believe you don't deserve them? Permission slip. I'm allowed to heal at my own pace. I'm allowed to make mistakes while I'm learning to love myself. I'm allowed to accept help and support even when I feel unworthy of it. I'm allowed to forgive myself for the ways I hurt myself when I didn't know better. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It's necessary for healing. This week, treat yourself with the same kindness that you would show a friend going through what you've been going through. Replace one self-critical thought with a compassionate one. Alrighty, so what this chapter exposes, painfully, honestly, is that abuse doesn't always end when the abuser leaves. Sometimes the most dangerous part comes after, when the person who hurt you is gone, but the rules they taught you are still running your life. That's what I mean by the self-torture years. This wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It wasn't recklessness or drama or weakness. It was me following this internal playbook I didn't even realize I was using. One that was written by fear and shame and survivor's guilt. For a long time, I thought I was just falling apart. But looking back now, I can see how organized my self-destruction actually was, which is crazy. Trauma trained me to believe that love was dangerous, and closeness with anyone just led to catastrophe, and my body was unsafe and my presence caused harm. And once those beliefs take root, your mind starts treating pain like protection. You hurt yourself before anyone else can. You push people away before they get close enough to leave. And you deny yourself comfort because comfort feels undeserved. And even worse, it feels suspicious. And that's what happened with Nate. I didn't push him away because I didn't love him. I pushed him away because I loved him more than anyone else in my life. Trauma taught me that loving me had consequences. And it taught me that my love ruined people and that my body brought violence. So my brain, my existence came with a cost. So my brain decided that the safest thing for him was for me to disappear emotionally and relationally and eventually almost physically. And this is something that survivors don't talk about too often. Self-sabotage can feel morally right when you're drowning in guilt. It can feel like responsibility, like accountability, like penance. I wasn't just pushing Nate away. I was punishing myself for surviving. And I was trying to atone for a loss that felt absolutely unforgivable. Trauma doesn't ask, is this fair? It asks, how do we make sure this never happens again? And sometimes the answer it gives is, don't let yourself be loved. Yeah. The self-destructive behaviors that I went through as well, that I wrote about, the binge eating and the sex and the isolation and the cruelty and the emotional withdrawal, like they weren't random. They were attempts to control pain. Food became armor, weight became invisibility, sex became a way to rewrite the script and to convince myself that I was choosing instead of being chosen, and that I had power instead of vulnerability. But empowerment that's rooted in self-hatred doesn't heal you. It just keeps you busy while you bleed internally. What hurts the most, reading this chapter back now, is how I thoroughly believed I was dangerous. Not sad, not broken, but dangerous. As if loving me was an act of negligence, staying with me meant signing up for some sort of devastation or something. And trauma has a way of convincing you that isolation is kindness and leaving is generosity and disappearing is love. And once you believe that, you start mistaking cruelty for honesty and abandonment for integrity. It's crazy. It's crazy. Survivor's guilt is everywhere in this chapter as well. It's kind of in every choice that I made and every relationship that I burned to the ground. Every good thing I refused. Survivor's guilt doesn't just say, why did I live? It says, why do I get comfort? Why do I get love? Why do I get a future when someone else doesn't? And when you can't answer those questions, punishment starts to feel like the only ethical response. If you've ever looked at someone offering you love and felt panic instead of relief, if kindness made you flinch, or patience made you suspicious, or if being seen made you want to literally disappear, you're just responding exactly the way someone does when their nervous system learned that closeness equals danger. Trauma doesn't remove your capacity for love. It just distorts your relationship to safety. Another painful truth in this chapter is that sometimes love can't save someone. Not because it isn't strong enough, but because the person receiving it doesn't believe that they're allowed to keep it. Nate loved me deeply, patiently, genuinely, and it still wasn't enough to override the voice in my head telling me I was poison for him. It didn't make him weak, and it didn't make me evil. It just made us human inside of this system that trauma rigged against both of us. If you've ever been, the Nate in a story like this, loving someone who keeps pretty much lighting themselves on fire, you're not failing them by stepping back. You're not abandoning them by protecting yourself. Love does not require self-sacrifice to the point of erasure. And if you've ever been the version of me who pushed love away because you believed you were too damaged to keep it, please hear this too. The people who love you are not asking you to be healed. They're just asking you to stay. One of the most insidious things about trauma is how quietly it becomes your inner narrator. At some point, Brandon wasn't saying those things anymore. I was. I'd absorbed his voice so completely that I mistook it for truth. Healing didn't start when that voice disappeared, right? It started when I learned to question it, when I realized that cruelty didn't equal clarity and punishment didn't equal responsibility. This chapter isn't about shame. It's about recognition, about naming the ways that we hurt ourselves after we've been hurt and understanding that those behaviors once served a purpose. They kept us alive. But survival strategies aren't meant to be permanent homes. They're not. It's easy, but no. What protected you once might be the very thing that's suffocating you now. If you recognize yourself in these pages, if you're isolating yourself or you're numbing using substances or anything, or if you're pushing people away, if you're convinced that you are dangerous or unlovable or completely beyond repair, that voice isn't you. It's leftover harm and it doesn't get the final say. So please remember that. Healing doesn't start with forgiveness or positivity or moving on. It starts with noticing the self-torture and saying, this made sense once, but it doesn't get to run my life anymore. And if you're not there yet, that's okay too. Awareness comes before change, always. Compassion comes before healing, and you are allowed to take your time finding your way back to yourself. Took me this long. Can take a long time, and that's okay. So that's it. Thank you so much for being here. Please make sure to follow me wherever you listen to me so that when new episodes come out, you'll be notified. All episodes of Unbound are free, but if you want to support the production costs, all the support and contact info and all that fancy stuff is in the show notes. You can also join the Facebook group if you wish to continue the conversation there. I will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.